Archer Owens hadn't meant to end up at a dingy 24-hour diner on the edge of Brooklyn at 1 in the morning, but the sight of the glowing neon open sign felt like the first honest thing he'd seen all day. He pushed through the door, the bell overhead jingling sharply in the quiet space. The diner was mostly empty, just a trucker half asleep in a booth and a couple arguing in whispers over pie. Archer moved to the counter, loosened the top button of his shirt, and sat down. He looked every inch the powerful CEO he was. Tailored navy suit, silver watch, expression blank from too many meetings and not enough sleep. Coffee, came a voice, low and warm. He glanced up. The woman behind the counter wasn't what he expected. No forced smile or fake chipper tone. Just a pair of curious brown eyes, a tired ponytail, and a pen tucked behind her ear like she was too busy to care where it landed. Her name tag read, Nola. Yeah, he said. Black. She poured without a word, slid the mug in front of him, then leaned on the counter like she had nowhere better to be. Rough night? He didn't answer right away. Being the CEO of Owens Holdings meant everyone always wanted something. No one ever asked how his day was. He looked at her again. She had ink on her fingers like she'd been writing or sketching between shifts. You could say that, he said. Nola didn't press. She just nodded and grabbed a rag to wipe down the counter, humming something under her breath. It was nice. The silence. The lack of needing to impress or be impressed. He hadn't felt that in years. You're not from around here, she said after a beat. What gave me away? She pointed to his cufflinks. Those probably cost more than my car. Archer almost laughed. They were a gift. From who? The Queen. He smiled, the kind that surprised even him. Close enough. She snorted and walked away to refill the trucker's mug. Archer watched her move, graceful but grounded. There was something about her, like she didn't care who he was or what he had. Like she wouldn't flinch if he told her he'd closed a $300 million deal that morning. He stayed for 2 more cups. When he finally left, he paused at the door. You here every night? Nola raised a brow. You planning to make this a habit? He held her gaze. Maybe. He did make it a habit. Every few nights, when the weight of the boardroom became too much, Archer found himself back at the diner. Always late, always tired, and always hoping she'd be there. And she was. Nola always had coffee ready by the time he sat down. Sometimes they talked. Sometimes they didn't. He never told her who he really was, and she never asked. He liked that. He liked her. One night, after a long silence, she said, You look miserable. Archer blinked. Thanks. I mean it. She leaned on the counter, eyes soft. You've got haunted eyes. Like you're waiting for someone to give you permission to breathe. That hit harder than he expected. He looked down at his coffee. I don't think I know how to breathe anymore. She didn't say anything. Just refilled his cup and placed a napkin beside it. Scribbled on it were the words, Start here. 3 weeks after that first night, Archer walked into the diner and saw her crying. It was subtle, quiet tears she tried to hide as she restocked the pie case. But he noticed. He always noticed her. He crossed the room quickly. Nola? She wiped her face fast and turned her back. It's nothing. Just tired. He stepped closer. Don't lie to me. Her shoulders stiffened. After a pause, she whispered, My landlord's hiking the rent again. I can't afford it. I've been saving, but it's not enough. I'll figure it out. His fists clenched. He wanted to fix it. Wanted to write a check and make it disappear. But he knew she'd never take his money, not if she didn't know who he was. So he asked, Do you have anywhere to go? She shook her head. He hesitated, then offered, I have a spare apartment. In Midtown. You could stay there. Just for a bit. She turned slowly, eyes narrowed. Why would you do that? He looked at her, really looked. Because you're the only thing that feels real in my life right now. She stared at him for a long moment. You're serious. I am. Why? I don't know, he said honestly. But I want to help you. She didn't answer. Just nodded once and went back to work, the conversation hanging heavy between them. He stayed until closing. 2 days later, she showed up outside his building. She wore the same black hoodie from the diner, a tired duffel bag slung over one shoulder. She looked up at the massive glass tower like it might swallow her whole. When Archer met her at the door, she crossed her arms. You didn't tell me you lived in a skyscraper. He looked sheepish. Didn't come up. I thought you were some burned-out accountant or something. He chuckled. Not quite. The elevator ride up was quiet. When the doors opened to the penthouse, Nola froze. Holy hell, she whispered. Floor-to-ceiling windows. Marble floors. A grand piano in the corner. It was another world. You're rich, she said flatly. Yeah. She turned to him. How rich? Enough. She exhaled. You should have told me. I didn't want that to be the thing you saw first. She studied him for a moment, then nodded. Okay. Okay. You helped me when you didn't have to. That counts for something. He smiled. Welcome home, Nola. She gave him a small smile back. Don't get used to me calling it that. But he already was. That night, she fell asleep on his couch, curled up in a blanket, a book open on her chest. Archer stood in the doorway for a long time, just watching her breathe. He didn't understand it, not fully, but something about her settled the chaos in his chest. She didn't care about his money or his name. She saw him. And for the first time in years, he wanted someone to see everything. The rain had started sometime after midnight, a slow, persistent drizzle that blurred the Manhattan skyline beyond Archer's penthouse windows. He stood near the glass wall in his home office, jacket off, sleeves rolled to the elbows, watching the city lights flicker behind the falling water. His phone buzzed on the desk, but he didn't look. He wasn't in the mood for board updates or calendar reminders or his assistant asking if he'd confirmed the Forbes interview. Behind him, Nola padded barefoot into the room. She wore an oversized T-shirt that clearly wasn't hers. It was branded with a name of a jazz club in New Orleans, a souvenir from a trip Archer had taken years ago and forgotten about. Her hair was still damp from a shower, strands curling around her face. She looked out of place in his world of glass and steel, and yet, somehow, like she belonged more than anyone ever had. You left the lights off, she said, her voice soft but not tentative. I like the dark sometimes, he replied without turning. It's honest. She stepped up beside him, folding her arms as she looked out at the misty skyline. You always this poetic after midnight? He gave a quiet laugh, brief and genuine. No. Only when I'm not pretending anymore. She glanced at him. Pretending to be what? He finally looked at her. Untouchable. Nola didn't answer right away. Instead, she leaned her hip against the window ledge and studied him in the faint light. I used to think people like you didn't feel anything. Like you were built different. Ice in your veins, all that. And now? She tilted her head. Now I think you just learned to hide it better than most. Archer didn't respond, but the silence stretched between them, weighted and real. She shifted the conversation. Your fridge is full of mineral water and a single lemon. That's either the saddest crime I've ever seen or the most elite diet in New York. I don't cook much. I can tell. There's a pan in your oven with the price tag still on it. His lips curved slightly. I've been meaning to throw that out. No, she said. You need it. I'm making gumbo tomorrow. He blinked. You know how to make gumbo? I'm from Baton Rouge, she said, as if that explained everything. My grandma would rise from the grave and slap me if I didn't. I've never had gumbo. Well, she said, already turning away, you're about to be educated. By the time she disappeared down the hallway, Archer realized he hadn't thought about work once in the past 10 minutes. The next day unfolded like nothing in his schedule ever had. He watched from the kitchen doorway, arms crossed, as Nola moved around the space with easy confidence, seasoning ingredients by instinct, not measurement. She hummed a tune he didn't recognize, barefoot again, wearing a pair of borrowed joggers that hung low on her hips. You never sit still, do you? He asked. She stirred the pot. I sit when I read. Or when I'm mad. What makes you mad? People who talk over cashiers. People who don't tip. People who think kindness is a weakness. He watched her more carefully now. You've had your share of those. Too many. She looked over her shoulder. You ever been poor? No, he didn't like the way her voice dropped on that word. Not judgmental, just distant. What, he asked? Nothing. Just, it's a different kind of tired, you know? She turned back to the stove. When every decision means the difference between dinner or a bus ride. You don't think past next week. You don't have the luxury. Archer folded his arms tighter. I grew up with everything. but it never felt like mine. She glanced back at him. What do you mean? My father built the company. My choices were always made for me, even the ones that looked like mine. You ever think about walking away? He hesitated. More than I admit. She stirred a little longer, then turned off the stove. Then why don't you? Because I don't know who I'd be without it. Well, she said, ladling the gumbo into 2 mismatched bowls. You'd still be the guy who eats 5 saltines in a row when he's nervous. He blinked. You noticed that? You do it every time someone from your office calls. He took a bowl from her, stunned into silence. They ate on the floor of the living room, cross-legged on a Persian rug he hadn't noticed until now. She told him stories about her high school English teacher who'd taught her to love poetry and the time she accidentally dyed her hair orange with a box of cheap dye and bad advice. He told her about the private boarding school he hated, the lake house he never visited, the night he almost walked out of the company for good but didn't. Neither of them brought up the fact that she was still technically just crashing at his place. That her duffel bag sat by the guest room door unpacked. That they hadn't defined anything, not even the strange tether pulling them closer every day. But that night, as Archer passed her in the hallway, she reached out and touched his wrist. Just a brush of fingers. Thanks for dinner, he said. She held his gaze. Thanks for letting me cook it. He turned to go but paused. I'm not sure what this is. Me neither. I don't want to ruin it. Then don't. That night, he didn't fall asleep until he heard the soft creak of the guest room door closing. The sound settled something in him. The next morning, Nola wasn't in the kitchen. Archer frowned and checked the living room. Empty. No note, no message. Her duffel bag was gone. So was the red scarf she'd worn the first night she arrived. Panic flared in his chest as he pulled out his phone, then stopped. He didn't have her number. Instead, he scanned the counter and finally saw it, a small, folded receipt from the diner. On the back, in looping ink, she'd written, "Sometimes people leave before they're asked to stay." He stared at the note for a long time, pulse thrumming like a warning bell. And then, without hesitation, Archer grabbed his keys and headed for the elevator. The rain had stopped by the time Archer stepped onto the street outside his building, but the air still clung to the humidity of early morning. The city was just waking up, but he was already wide awake, powered by a sharp current of urgency he couldn't ignore. Traffic was light, and his driver wasn't on call yet, so he hailed a cab himself for the first time in years. He rattled off the diner's cross streets before the driver could even ask. As the cab sped through the empty avenues, Archer tried to piece together what had changed. She had been fine the night before. Laughing. Cooking. There had been no sign she was planning to leave, and that was what bothered him most. Nola wasn't impulsive. She didn't run unless there was something chasing her. When he arrived at the diner, it was still dark inside. The neon sign flickered dimly, but the stools were empty, the counter wiped clean, chairs stacked on tables. She wasn't working. The place didn't even look like it had opened yet. He pulled out his phone not to call her because he still didn't have her number, but to search. He typed her name into his contacts list just to double-check. Nothing. He didn't know her last name. Didn't even know where she'd been staying before she came to him. For a man who owned 6 companies and could order a background check with a single call, it was a humbling realization. He leaned against the side of the building, eyes fixed on the horizon. The sky was beginning to pale with the early blush of dawn. He waited there until the owner of the diner, a stout woman in a denim apron, appeared with keys in hand. "You looking for someone?" she asked as she unlocked the door. "Nola," he said. "She's not working today?" The woman paused. "She quit." His chest tightened. "What?" "Said she needed to take care of something. Left her last paycheck uncollected. Didn't even clean out her locker." "Do you know where she went?" The woman studied him a moment. "You a friend?" He hesitated. "Something like that. She mentioned a brother in Queens. Said she might visit, but she didn't give details." "Sorry, mister." Archer nodded slowly. He thanked her and walked away, but the information sat heavily in his chest. He didn't know she had a brother. He didn't know her last name. He didn't know anything that could help him find her. And still, he couldn't go back to pretending she hadn't been in his life at all. Back at the penthouse, he stood in the guest room doorway. The bed was neatly made, the bedside drawer slightly ajar. A single paperback was left behind, spine-worn, with a receipt marking the last page she'd read. It wasn't from the diner, it was from a bookstore in Astoria. He grabbed it. By the time he reached the small, independent shop in Queens, the sun was fully up. The bell over the door jingled as he stepped inside. Dust motes floated in the golden light streaming through the windows, and the scent of old paper wrapped around him like something familiar. A young woman behind the counter looked up. "Can I help you?" Archer held up the receipt. "Do you remember who bought this?" She squinted. "That's from 3 weeks ago. I might have rung it up. Maybe if I saw them." "She's about this tall," he said, gesturing. "Brown eyes. Hair always pulled back. Ink on her hands. Talks like she doesn't care what anyone thinks, but listens like it matters more than anything." The woman blinked. "Oh, yeah. I know her. She's been coming in for months. Used to hang out in the poetry section." "Do you know her name?" "No, sorry. I just know she liked the window seat." "Has she been in lately?" "Not since last week. She bought a journal and a poetry collection. Looked kind of done." He pressed his lips together. "Do you know where she might have gone?" The woman hesitated, then stepped around the counter. "She left this on the reading table. I didn't throw it out because I thought maybe she'd come back." She handed him a folded piece of lined paper. It wasn't addressed to anyone, but the handwriting was unmistakably hers. "If you're reading this, I guess I didn't come back. I don't like disappearing, but sometimes it feels safer than waiting for the other shoe to drop. You made me forget how heavy the world was. That's a rare thing. Thank you for the quiet. For the space. I hope you find what you're looking for." He stared at the note until the words blurred. Then he folded it carefully and slipped it into his coat pocket. He didn't go back to the office that day. Instead, he made calls. Personal ones. Tracked down names, addresses, leads. He followed threads until one finally tugged loose. A community arts center in Brooklyn had a listing for a weekend workshop spoken word poetry beginner level. Instructor, Nola Avery. And just like that, he had her last name. By Sunday evening, he stood outside the modest brick building, heart pounding like he was about to walk into his first investor pitch. He had no idea what he was going to say, only that he had to say something. Inside, voices were echoing. Laughter. Applause. Through the glass doors, he caught a glimpse of her standing in front of a group of 10, holding a notebook, reading aloud. Her hair was loose for once, framing her face as she spoke with quiet conviction. She looked steady, like someone who had finally planted her feet. When the class ended, people filtered out past him, chatting and smiling. He waited by the stairs, hands in his pockets. She came out last. Her eyes landed on him instantly and widened. "You found me," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "I had to," he replied. She looked away like she wasn't sure she was ready for this, whatever this was. "Why?" she asked finally. He took a step closer. "Because you were the only person who saw me without the price tag. Because I woke up the day you left and realized the penthouse was too quiet. Because I haven't felt like myself since you walked out." She let out a shaky breath. "You didn't know my last name." "I do now." "Well, that's something." He reached into his pocket and held out the folded paper. "You left this." She took it, stared down at her own handwriting, then looked up. "I meant it. I know. I didn't want to be another person orbiting your world." "You never were," he said. "You were the center of it." Her eyes searched his. "I don't want to be saved, Archer." "Good," he said. "I'm tired of saving people. I just want to be with someone who makes it worth staying." For a long time, she didn't speak. Just looked at him with something unreadable behind her eyes. Then, finally, she stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him. It wasn't a dramatic kiss or a movie scene reunion. It was better. It was real. Nola stood at the edge of the rooftop, the evening wind tugging gently at her coat as she stared out at the skyline. The city glowed beneath her in 100 shades of gold and silver, each light a story she didn't know. Behind her, the soft rustle of movement let her know Archer had joined her. "Didn't think you'd actually show up," she said without turning. I said I would, Archer replied. You also said you had 5 meetings today. I canceled them. She glanced over her shoulder, one brow raised. Did the world end? No, he said, stepping up beside her. It just stopped spinning for a bit. Nola huffed a short laugh and went quiet again. He didn't interrupt. The silence between them wasn't awkward anymore. It had settled into something more like rhythm. Below them, the bustle of Manhattan sounded distant, like a world apart from the one they'd carved out for themselves on this rooftop. I used to come up here when I was a kid, Archer said after a moment. Before it was a penthouse. My father kept the place when we moved uptown. I'd sneak up here during parties. Fancy kid problems. He shrugged. I didn't like the people. They always laughed too loud and said things they didn't mean. She turned slightly. And now you're one of them? I try not to be. Are you succeeding? I'm still figuring that out. She leaned against the railing, her gaze drifting to the horizon. It's weird, isn't it? All the things we don't say because we're afraid saying them will make them real. I'm not afraid of that anymore, Archer said. Nola looked at him, really looked, and for the first time, there was no trace of uncertainty in her eyes. Then say it, she said. I love you. The words weren't rushed. They didn't shake. They landed between them with quiet certainty. Nola didn't answer right away. She let the wind carry the weight of the moment before she spoke. I've been in love with you since the night you asked if I was here every night. I had no idea what I was walking into. Neither did I. He reached for her hand, his fingers threading through hers naturally. You make me want things I forgot I was allowed to want. She turned to face him fully. I don't need the penthouse, Archer. I know. I don't care about the money or the name or the exclusives. I know that too. But I do care about the way you look at me like I'm not background noise. You never were. She stepped closer, her free hand resting against his chest. So what do we do now? We build something. Something small. No, he said. Something that lasts. A few days later, Archer stood inside a space that hadn't existed 3 weeks ago. It was a corner unit in Soho, all natural light and high ceilings. Plants lined the windowsills. The scent of fresh paint and new beginnings clung to the air. Nola walked in behind him, a key dangling from her hand. This is yours now, he said. She looked around, taking in the empty bookshelves, the unboxed journals stacked against the walls. You're giving me a studio? I'm investing in you. I didn't ask for that. You didn't have to. She wandered toward the stack of blank notebooks. This isn't about proving anything, is it? No, he said. It's about putting something good into the world. Starting with you. She turned back toward him, her expression unreadable for a beat. I don't know how to accept this and still be myself. Then we'll figure it out together. He walked over to her, placed a small envelope in her hands. She opened it slowly, unfolding the paper inside. It was a business license. Avery Inc., a creative studio for writers and storytellers. She swallowed. You registered it in my name? You own it. No strings. No hidden clauses. Just a space to write. To teach. To be. Her voice was quiet. You really think I can do this? I've never been more certain of anything in my life. Later that week, they stood together at the grand opening. A few close friends, former students, and curious neighbors trickled in, sipping coffee and browsing shelves. Archer didn't wear a suit. Nola didn't wear shoes. She walked barefoot across the hardwood, grounding herself in the space she now owned. At one point, she pulled him aside, her fingers clutching his wrist. You know what I realized? She said. What? I don't miss the diner. He smiled. Not even the late-night weirdos? Oh, I still get those. They just come earlier now. They stood there for a while, watching people move through the space like it had always existed. Do you regret any of it? She asked. Not even a second. Even the part where I left without saying goodbye? Especially that part. It made me chase you. She shook her head, but she laughed. You're impossible. And you're everything. The next morning, they returned to the rooftop. This time, there were no lingering questions. No one said things between them. Archer pulled a small box from his coat pocket, handed it to her without ceremony. She opened it slowly, eyes widening as she took in the ring inside. Simple band. No diamonds. Just a single sapphire set against a gold curve like a piece of sky caught in metal. I don't want a big wedding, she said immediately. Neither do I. I don't want press. Or photographers. You'll have none. She looked up at him. But I do want you. You've got me, he said. All of me. When she said yes, she didn't cry. Neither did he. They just held on long after the city lights blinked on beneath them. And in the quiet, they began again. No titles. No masks. Just two people finally choosing each other. The first snow came early that year. Thick flakes spun through the air like confetti as Archer and Nola stepped out of the brownstone in the West Village, bundled in coats and scarves. He reached down, lacing his fingers with hers as they crossed into the quiet street, the city hushed beneath a blanket of white. The world felt suspended as if offering them a final moment before everything changed. Tell me again why we're walking instead of taking the car, she asked, tucking her chin deeper into her scarf. Because I wanted you to see it, he said. Not just arrive. See what? You'll know. They passed shuttered boutiques and glowing cafe windows, the scent of roasted espresso drifting into the air. A child ran ahead of his mother, catching snowflakes on his tongue. Nola watched him with a quiet smile before Archer gently tugged her forward. The walk ended in front of a narrow storefront with frosted windows and an old-fashioned iron sign above the door. The lettering was hand-painted in deep blue, the paper lantern. She blinked. Is this? He nodded. It's yours. But the studio is still yours, he cut in. This is something else. You said once you wanted to create a space for stories. Not just the ones you wrote, but the ones that didn't have a home. She stepped forward slowly, peering inside. Warm light spilled from sconces on the walls. Shelves lined with blank journals, hand-bound poetry books, and regional zines wrapped the space in quiet color. A reading nook in the corner held two overstuffed armchairs and a coffee table stacked with notebooks. You bought me a store, she whispered. No. I bought you a beginning. You decide what it becomes. Nola stepped inside, breath-catching as she walked the length of the room. She paused at the back wall where a mural of painted lanterns floated upward through clouds of ink and paper stars. I didn't think you remembered that drawing I showed you, she said. I remember everything. She turned slowly, her expression unreadable. You're not afraid I'll fail? He shook his head. I'm afraid you'll settle for something smaller than your heart. She crossed the room back to him, eyes searching. You know what scares me? Tell me. That this is actually real. That I get to have this and you and the life I only let myself want when no one was looking. You don't have to hide anymore. I still feel like I'm waiting for someone to tell me I didn't earn any of it. He brushed his hand gently along the curve of her jaw. Then let me be the one who reminds you every day that you did. That you do. She leaned into his touch. Say it again. I love you. Still? Always? The ceremony was small. Held in the garden of her new shop just after sunset, the lanterns above them glowing with soft gold light. No press, no headlines. Just the people who mattered. Archer's assistant who cried when he read the vows. The owner of the Queen's bookstore who gifted them a first edition of a poetry collection neither had read. A handful of Nola's students who recited original pieces during the reception. Instead of cake, they served warm pastries from the diner where it all began. The owner had insisted on baking them herself. Archer wore a deep charcoal suit, no tie, his hair wind-tossed and casual. Nola wore a tea-length ivory dress with hand-stitched embroidery along the hem that mirrored the mural in the shop. She walked down the aisle barefoot, carrying a bouquet of wildflowers tied with a strip of fabric from her old diner uniform. They didn't write traditional vows. Instead, they read each other letters neither had shown anyone before. I didn't know what peace sounded like until I heard you humming under your breath while you stirred gumbo, Archer said. I didn't know what home felt like until you fell asleep on my couch with a book on your chest. Loving you didn't feel like falling. It felt like remembering. And then Nola, voice steady despite the tears in her eyes. You gave me the kind of love that didn't ask me to shrink. You didn't try to rescue me. You gave me the space to rescue myself. And when I did, you were still there, holding the door open. They kissed as the lantern swayed overhead and the city, for once, stayed quiet. That night, after the guests had gone and the lights had dimmed, they returned to the penthouse for the last time. Boxes were already stacked along the walls, packed and labeled. They'd decided to move into the brownstone above the new shop. A home that felt more like them. There would be no assistant waiting in the kitchen, no driver at the curb. Just them and a garden and enough windows to let in the morning light. As they stood in the empty living room, Archer pulled her close. "You know," he said, "I used to think this place was everything. And now?" He looked around at the marble floors and floor-to-ceiling glass. "Now it just feels like a glass box I was waiting to be let out of." She rested her head against his chest. "So let's go." They left hand in hand without looking back. Years passed quietly, not in the way things faded, but in the way they finally fit. Nola's shop became a neighborhood cornerstone. A place for late-night readings and morning journaling groups and quiet, sacred moments where people remembered they still had stories worth telling. Archer stepped down from the board of Owens Holdings 2 years later. He stayed on as a silent partner, but spent most of his time advising small businesses and mentoring underfunded startups. The kind that had ideas but no connections. He said it helped him breathe. On weekends, they took long walks through Prospect Park with coffee in hand. Every Sunday, he let her read to him out loud from whatever she was writing, even if it wasn't finished. Especially if it wasn't finished. They never talked about the penthouse. They didn't need to. One spring afternoon, as the garden bloomed with heavy clusters of purple wisteria, she found him sitting on the back steps, a leather-bound book in his lap. "What are you doing out here?" she asked, wiping her hands on her apron. "Waiting." "For what?" He held up the book. "You left this on my desk. Page marked." She sat beside him, shoulder brushing his. "I wanted you to read that poem." "I did." "And?" He turned to her, eyes warm. "It ends with the line, 'I never knew the world could be this quiet without being empty.'" She nodded. "It's a good line." He took her hand. "It's the only one that ever made sense." They sat there until the light faded, their fingers interlaced, the garden humming with the sound of bees and wind chimes. And for once, there was nothing left to say. Because they had built a life where every page mattered. Where every silence was full. And neither of them ever walked alone again.